God has placed us in the marketplace to be salt and light through our actions. We look to love our employees and the broader communities in which we do business in a way that is exemplary and distinctive. And while we could focus heavily on the work that we do, and we should, it's just as relevant in the ways that we lead. There's truth in the old cliche that actions speak louder than words, and this couldn't be more applicable than in leadership. How often have we seen actions of our leaders fall well short of the faith that they proclaim to hold? Secular workplaces might be one of the most challenging for us as followers of Christ to lead. Day in and day out, we face an environment that can be hostile to our beliefs. And yet, if we are courageous enough to rely on God and His providence, then we have nothing to fear in reflecting His beauty in the break room and the boardroom. Pat Gelsinger began his career at Intel, where he was appointed the company's youngest VP. He was the architect of the original 486 processor. A few years later, he became Intel's first Chief Technology Officer. Today, serving as CEO, Pat is a committed Christian and the author of The Juggling Act, Bringing Balance to Your Faith, Family, and Work. He speaks frequently on faith, work, and philanthropy to a worldwide workforce and audience. Henry recently sat down with Pat during our Faith Driven Investor Live annual conference. The two of them discussed the challenges of faith-based leadership in publicly traded companies and how Pat has successfully navigated that during his distinguished career. Let's watch together.
Well, this has been a journey for me since early on, and in fact, maybe a little bit of the story of how I got here is fun.
Please.
Where I was very young in my faith. I was working at Intel a few months, and I felt compelled by God to go into ministry. And I'm a very young Christian. I'm at Intel maybe 8 months at this point, had just become a Christian maybe 4 months earlier. And God says, go into full-time ministry. And I started arguing with God. I said, I don't want to be a minister, right? I don't want to be one of those pastor folk. I love this technology stuff, what I'm doing. And I'm wrestling with God for a while. And I said, okay, God, I give up, right? If this happens, I'll go into full-time ministry. And the answer from God was, the workplace is your ministry. And Colossians 3:23 and 24 became my life verse. Work heartily as for the Lord and not from men, knowing that you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. Yes. And that's always been saying, okay, I'm in the workplace, but I'm a full-time Christian, full-time minister, visible for my faith in those roles. And boy, that's been the journey of almost 40 years now as a Christian, as a leader in the workplace. And to me, it's been occasionally challenging, but extraordinarily rewarding knowing that, I work for Intel. No, I work for the Lord Jesus Christ on a daily basis.
So how does that work out? A lot of people talk about St. Francis of Assisi, and that's the way to kind of inform what we do. And they, preach the gospel, always use words when necessary. Of course, what's missed in that is that he was also one of the most famous open-air pastors of all time, right? But you've navigated through deed and excellence, and also sharing your faith. This is not the first time you've talked about your faith in front of a public audience. How do you navigate that tension?
Yeah, and in many ways, I'll say, there's a couple of key rules that I've learned over time to navigate that well. One is, I'd say, first, the thesis behind how you bring your faith into the workplace. And today, there's a lot of discussion on diversity and inclusion. Okay, and it turns out that for humanity, over 70% of all humans on the earth claim that faith is an or the most important thing in their lives. So if we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, but we're not going to allow faith in the workplace, I'm telling 70% of humanity, no, the most important thing to you can't come into the workplace. So of course, diversity and inclusion means that faith needs to come into the workplace. It needs to be visible. Otherwise, I'm telling you, keep that at home, but other aspects of inclusion you're able to bring into the workplace. That doesn't work, right? Diversity and inclusion is all about bringing your whole self into the workplace, your ethnic self, your sexual orientation, your social, and your faith. So I say, I'm proud of bringing my faith into the workplace. And in fact, if I, as the CEO, who's the chief culture officer of Intel, can't demonstrate my diversity in the workplace, then how can anybody? So in fact, I need to be representing my faith, what's most important to me, or other aspects of my personality in the workplace. But then, the second piece of it is I also then, as a Christian CEO, need to make it okay for everybody else to bring their faith perspectives into the workplace. And, oh, you're a Sikh. Tell me about being a Sikh. Oh, what's Ramadan? I just was talking, my board of directors was celebrating Ramadan, and I said, next year, I'm going to celebrate it with you. And I'm going to do the fasting with you next year as well. I'm going to know about your faith and your perspectives and so on. And for that, people might say, well, you're proselytizing if you talk about your faith. No, I'm bringing my whole self into the workplace, and I must make it okay for all other faith perspectives, including no faith. Right? Some will say, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any faith. Well, great. That's your worldview, and I need to make that okay too when they're part of my team, part of the workplace that we're together sharing.
Yeah. So presumably, when you encourage that and allow somebody to bring their whole selves to work, people feel more welcome and they stick around more, they do more excellent work, and it probably even flows through to the bottom line. Yeah,
and in fact, there's lots of studies now that have shown that more diverse, inclusive workspace brings better outcomes.
Yeah.
People, hey, if I'm able to, bring my whole self into the workplace, I feel honored in my faith traditions or, my cultural and ethnic traditions, then I'm able to participate more effectively in work discussions as well. And I can bring those perspectives where, the famous story of the first version of the Apple Watch, right, where it didn't detect a women's period because there was nobody on the design team who was a female, right? And it's sort of like, wow, you immediately just saw, hey, not having a gender diversity was a total design flaw in the product. Well, this is every aspect of bringing yourself into the workplace, and how will this product or this decision be seen by different ethnic groups, different social groups, different genders, et cetera. And of course, as we said, faith is one of those.
So that's fascinating to me. I have a friend of mine named Chris Seipel, who is a big proponent for religious freedom, and he has a phrase that I really like, which is, truth stands out in the marketplace of ideas. And that as faith-driven leaders, we should welcome that and include that and encourage people to bring their whole selves to work. So I think that's really cool. And one of the things that will probably be a surprise to most of our listeners and most of our watchers is that the concept of faith-driven employee resource groups really started out here, right? At Apple, and then at Facebook, and at Google.
And at Intel.
And of course at Intel. Of course at Intel. But that'll be a surprise to a lot of folks that think that maybe they're in Chicago right now and thinking, well, I don't really know I can do that. Yeah, maybe if I'm in Nashville I could, but can't do that in Chicago. Actually out here, that's now accepted business, right?
Yeah, and we have over 30 different employee resource groups now with the company. And one of the earliest ones was the Intel Christian Bible Network that I helped to start. Many, many years ago. And in fact, last year we were recognized by the United Nations as one of the most faith-friendly companies, and I and our head of HR were recognized for
awesome.
that as well, right? It's sort of like, wow, that's came full circle, 30 years ago, and now being recognized by the United Nations, it was like, okay, this is pretty special.
It is really special. Okay, so let's go back to the juggling act a bit, and this concept, because all faith-driven entrepreneurs wrestle with this. What does it look like? You've got 4 kids, and they were all at home when you're writing the book. Talk to us about how you manage that. What was the juggling act about? Give our listeners a little bit of encouragement on that, please.
Sure, and it is, right? It's sort of why the title is very fitting, right? Because you're being stretched by work.
I'm so grateful for a time. I can't let you go before I just kind of throw out just kind of a grab bag one for you, and you can answer any way you want. To an audience of faith-driven entrepreneurs, they're trying to understand, how do I know God more fully through my work? How do I do my work with excellence? How do I lead my family? But gosh, how do I just make sure that I don't lose my faith in the midst of this, all the things that are going on? Anything that you'd have as an encouragement or a warning, admonition, anything.
And you clearly, your work can become so consuming. And particularly you're a couple of years into this entrepreneurial journey. Maybe you're succeeding, maybe not. You're just pouring yourself into it because you've given so much of your life and passion to it. And I'd ask you all the question: are you still putting God on the throne every day? And if the answer to that is no, then what are you going to do to put God on the throne every single day? Every single morning, are you in devotion, right? Are you really honoring Him with the day? And some days, hey, He might stay on the throne till about 8:02. Okay, well, tomorrow we're working on keeping God on the throne till 8:03, right? Stuff happens here. But are you putting Him on the throne daily? Are you in fellowship with Him? Are you in regular worship in church? Do you have mentors who are keeping you accountable to the relationship and position that you would want God to have in your life? That iron sharpening iron. Okay, how is your devotion time going?
Yeah.
People who are really to challenge. Do each one of you have those kind of people that are challenging you? And you're going to screw up, you're going to fail, and so on. But then also seeing that the most important thing you do as a leader is to be a great leader. Right? Make your company successful. That is the most God-honoring thing that you can do. Right? You're not doing work instead of faith. You're doing faith through your work. Right, in the workplace. And the most God-honoring thing you can do is do that with excellence. And every day that you show up into the workplace, do it with absolute excellence. And then finally, it would be that as a leader, and particularly now as a public company leader as well. I am thrilled that I get to speak through today 121,000 people at Intel, right? I get to make their lives better every day. I get to help them create wealth for their families, improve the communities that they're in, demonstrate through, our benefits, through our foundation and philanthropies that we do as a company, that I want to unleash their passions into their communities and to what's most important to them. I want to create a workplace that they truly are thrilled and say, I can be my full self when I show up at Intel. And as a leader, as a CEO, that's what you get to do each day. What could be more thrilling than to say, I'm positively impacting 121,000 lives on a daily basis. Wow. But then I also get to say, through what we do at Intel, that we're here improving the lives of every human on the planet through the power of technology.
I was going to suggest that if you didn't. Yes.
It's just so cool. It's just, and I helped to create USB. I helped to create Wi-Fi. I helped to create the personal computer. I helped to create the cloud. Okay, we're now at 60% of humans are connected to the internet. By 2030, that'll be 90%. Wow, yeah, I'm going to touch the lives of every human on the planet and make their lives better, right? We're going to educate, right? And education, the best way to lift people out of extreme poverty as well. That's the stuff we get to do as technologists and impacting the world. And what could be more thrilling than a Christian to say, that's right, I'm improving the lives of every human on the planet.
It's really awesome. It's really awesome. Pat, I'm so grateful for your time, for your leadership, for your friendship, for your encouragement in the Bay Area and beyond. On behalf of our audience, thank you very much.
Pat talked about the importance of leadership. But what about the performance of our capital? Does faith-driven investing mean that we have to sacrifice our rate of return in order to pursue redemption in the marketplace? In a word, no. Faith-driven investing represents the full spectrum of deploying capital. Sure, it can mean the kind of investing that is concessionary and that we might forfeit some financial return in order to accelerate social or spiritual impact. That is one form of it. But faith-driven investing can also represent investing at market rate return. And in some instances, it might even lead to outperforming secular counterparts. Think about it. If we are truly living out our faith, creating a culture of flourishing, pursuing excellence, ministering in word and deed, living for something beyond ourselves, would it be any surprise that we might outperform the world around us? All of those things I just mentioned are good business ideas. why wouldn't they potentially lead to better performance? Personally, I believe that God's principles are not only good for eternity, but also for this life. Recently, we had the chance to interview Matt Monson from Sovereign's Capital about some of the research that they've been doing on faith-driven entrepreneurs leading in the public markets. Let's watch together.
Matt Monson's been doing research on leaders like Pat over the last few years, and he's joining me to discuss some of his preliminary findings. Matt, we talk a lot about how a faith-driven leader can positively impact the culture of a company to enable greater human flourishing for employees and their families. Conventional wisdom would suggest that there is a cost for everything, and that if you do something positive for employees, shareholders must be required to accept a lower return from their investment in the company. Through your research, though, you found strong evidence to prove that human flourishing for employees and financial returns are correlated. Can you tell us a little bit about those findings?
Conventional wisdom suggests that if you do something positive for employees, it must cost shareholders something. But we found the exact opposite to be true after examining the data. We found that human flourishing of employees and shareholder returns are correlated. There's a simple thesis that explains the correlation. If a company builds an incredible culture that cares for employees, that company will attract and retain some of the most talented employees in the market. It's an obvious conclusion that a company with the highest quality employees will outperform their competitors. As a result, we believe that culture is the greatest competitive advantage in business and that there is no greater culture than one that is underpinned by biblical values. So let's take a look at a familiar example. Chick-fil-A has nearly double the sales per store as their nearest high-performance peer. Yet, they only work 6 days a week. Their balance sheet assets are the same as their peers, so what explains the difference in sales? I would suggest that the real assets are their culture and people. So we took that thesis and we went out to look for public companies in the United States led by faith-driven CEOs that have built unique cultures focused on human flourishing for their employees. The 125 companies we found with the highest degree of spiritual integration delivered 7 percentage points of annual outperformance versus the stock market over the last 10 years. And within that set of companies, the 50 companies with the highest spiritual integration scores outperformed the market by 10 percentage points per year for the last 10 years. This group of companies was underweight factors such as tech companies, growth companies, and large cap companies that have driven so much of the performance in the stock market over the last 10 years, which really supported the conclusion that the spiritual integration component of these companies is what was causing so much of the outperformance versus the market. So again, I believe that culture is the greatest competitive advantage in business. Companies with great cultures will attract and retain the best employees, and those employees will deliver outperformance.
We just had Henry interview Pat Gelsinger, the CEO of Intel. Can you give us maybe a couple of examples of a faith-driven CEO of a public company and anything special they might be doing to enable human flourishing for their employees?
There are a lot of exciting stories to share. Why don't I walk you through a company that we own in one of our investment strategies that ranks in the top cohort from a spiritual integration perspective and injected spiritual integration midway through the CEO's tenure so that you can see the data before and after to assess the impact of spiritual integration. So the company I'd like to walk you through is called LCI. It's run by a CEO by the name of Jason Lippert out of Elkhart, Indiana, and they manufacture RV parts. They have a $3 billion market cap. So back in 2011, Jason Lippert decided that he'd do a listening tour because at the time, his employee turnover rate was 120%. Imagine 120% of the employees of a company turning over in a given year. And so he realized from that 120% turnover that he wasn't enabling his employees to flourish. So what he did was he sat down with employees and they said everything from, there was leadership shortfalls to the bathrooms were filthy. And he said, well, I can fix these things, but why stop there? Why not go on offense? So what he did was he hired pastors and sports coaches to sit down with, at the time, 8,000 employees, and now they're 14,000 today. And they sat down with these employees to ask them what their dreams were. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never heard a public company CEO asking employees what their dreams were. And so these pastors and sports coaches learned that employees, really were dreaming about losing weight or quitting tobacco or having a better relationship with their wife or their kids. And so what they did was they helped them walk down that path. So fast forward a couple years later, and employee turnover fell from 120% to only 25%. That's incredible. So you can imagine the impacts that has on the performance of the company. Other things that were going on during the same period of time, in 2021, they had their first baptism on site at the company. They have a chaplain on staff. And if you ask Jason today what his number one part is, you'd expect him to say it's an RV part, but he doesn't. He said it's leadership and it's culture. And so one thing I find is really interesting is looking at the financial performance during the period of time that spiritual integration was put in place in a company. Because once again, conventional wisdom suggests that if you do something positive for employees, it's going to cost shareholders. But it's actually the opposite. So if you do something positive for employees and employee retention rates go way up, it should have very positive impacts on the company. And that's what we've seen at LCI. So from 2011 through the third quarter of 2022, the EBITDA at the company, or the earnings in a sense, have grown at an annual rate of 26 percentage points per year during that 10-ish year period of time. And even if you say that RV parts did really well during COVID and you want to look at 2011 through 2019, it still grew at a 19% rate, which is just phenomenal. And that's all with a share count that was held almost exactly flat and just over a turn of leverage. So he didn't use either his equity or his debt to fuel that growth. Jason found a recipe for success, but rather than hoarding that to himself, he started the Lippert Leadership Academy to share his best practices with anyone that wants to come and learn. We are so proud to stand alongside Jason and support him as he runs a culture that enables his employees to flourish and delivers above market returns to shareholders.
Since God owns everything, the caretaking of his capital isn't our responsibility alone. What a relief to know that the money that is placed in our hands is simply there to steward for his glory and for the flourishing of the world. God cares deeply about how, where, and why behind our investment strategies. How does a faith-driven investor follow through? This kind of tangible impact can be demonstrated in different ways. For entrepreneurs, they may faithfully guide others with integrity and high-level character. No cutting corners, no shortcuts, nothing that would create a chasm in credibility between what is said and what is done. So as much as our investments have impact, so too does the way that we go about leading those whose gifts, talents, and work ethic has been entrusted to us to steward well. Spend some time in your group talking about this session and how it relates to the journey that you're on. Open yourselves up to learning from one another. Be honest with each other. What you get out of this together will only be as enriching and life-giving as what you put into it. See you at the next session.
Faith-Driven Investor is a discipleship ministry from Faith-Driven Movements, a non-profit corporation whose mission is to inspire and mobilize people to use their time, talent, and resources to impact the world around them. The materials are for informational purposes only. All investing carries risk, so be sure to consult an advisor before making any investment decisions. Hosts and guests may maintain positions in the companies and securities discussed. For all other questions, please visit faithdriveninvestor.org.